Hello and a very warm welcome to the brand new edition of To The Point. I'm Kriti Mishra. And on today's show, we have with us Vice Chairman of NITI Aayog, Mr. Rajiv Kumar. Mr. Kumar, welcome to Rajya Sabha Television and thank you so much for joining us through Skype in these days of social distancing. Mr. Kumar, of course, we
Wonderful to meet
understand.
you, Kriti. Thank you for having me on your channel.
Thank you, sir. We understand that lockdown was an absolute necessity to break the chain of the virus and to contain the spread of the virus. But how do you look at the world post coronavirus?
Wow, that's some question because we are so much in the thick of it and so much in the thick of trying to prevent further acceleration and making sure that the curve plateaus and we get the numbers down. That not much thought. I haven't been able to give much thought to the post corona world, but I can. What I can see very clearly is that there will be a new normal, that all over the world and in India, everywhere, the corona pandemic will force us to think in different ways, will lead to different forms of doing things, social interaction, businesses, the way we conduct businesses, marketplaces, our globalization, etc. All of that, I think, will be thought through in different ways. Depends actually also on the severity and the length of the pandemic in the world, because I hope it doesn't, and God forbid, but if the pandemic does lead to a situation like the Great Depression
Yes.
that happened during the 30s, then we might be in for a very, not only for a very long haul, but for a complete overhauling of global institutions and global ways of doing things. So, moment can't say very much about what it will look like. As I said, depends entirely on how it affects us and how it affects the rest of the world. But quite clearly, some major changes on the way.
And talking about India, sir, what do you think would be the roadmap for exiting this lockdown? Of course, we do not have the certainty right now whether this lockdown ends on April 14th, but what would be the roadmap to exit this lockdown?
Well, I think, one thing is certain, that there will not be a pan-India solution or a pan-India approach to the exit from this lockdown. Because so many different states and such a complex picture that we have as a country, and the ground realities in every state is very different. So you will have to have sort of almost state-specific approaches and strategies to the exit from lockdown, depending on how well or how badly the state is faring, what is its capacities for delivery of essential services, what are its institutions for ensuring the welfare of the people, and what are the health capacities, what are the capacities for delivery of health services. All of that will determine state-specific approaches towards the exit. Now there will be some rules, of course, some guidelines, as it were, for India as a whole, and one of which would be that for a significant period of time, you will have to maintain social distancing.
Right.
So it's not going to be back as business as usual in terms of crowding, in terms of congestion, in terms of so the new standard operating procedures will have to be designed for our workplaces, for our travel, for our entertainment, and for our shopping. I think new SOPs will be required. So I think that's very clear. The other thing, of course, is that again, depending on how many such hotspots appear across the country, the approach towards them would have to be quite different. So, in short, Kriti, a differentiated approach, an approach which will permit states to exercise as much flexibility as they can, but also to be very focused upon local conditions where you can actually become hyper local and focus on certain areas which need to be isolated and to prevent the spread of the disease.
Mr. Kumar, you're making a very pertinent point about the states. Of course, convergence between the center and state, that would be of paramount importance. But since this is the end of the fiscal year and we have to tread on a very, very strict fiscal discipline and fiscal consolidation path, what kind of cohesive strategy between the state and the center you foresee?
Well, the cohesive strategy between the state and the center will first and foremost have to, be on the provision of adequate provision of health services. For example, all the states must ensure that in every district they have enough beds, for people who may have to be put in, who may have to be hospitalized or put in the ICUs, etc. Again, I hope these numbers remain very small. The other part of the cohesive strategy would be to make sure that you have enough supplies of all the protective equipment, of the masks, of the machines and equipment that you need for countering for facing up to the pandemic. Third part, of course, would be the maintenance of essential supplies, and especially the supplies for the most vulnerable sections of the population, those who are at the bottom of the pyramid, to make sure that they get provided for in whatever circumstances that we are. Now, this is where the states and the center will have to work closely together and devise a cohesive strategy for ensuring the sustenance of the people, for ensuring that we have the best foot forward for addressing the problems of the pandemic, and then to devise as I said, the new standing operating procedures for businesses to reopen and for us to go back to some kind of normalcy, after that. So I think this is where now is the time for the states to work together with the center, but also to learn from each other, because there are some very good practices that have come forth, from some states. Districts like Bhilwara, for example, have done remarkable work, and we can all learn from that. So that's the way we are going. But again, I think the pandemic itself calls for a new show, for a new level of national unity, because that's the resolve that we need to get, into all this. One last point that I do want to mention is that we have to now devise a approach towards how the governments and the private sector can work together, because the role of the private sector will be extremely important in both in fighting the pandemic, and because half the number of hospital beds are in the private sector, and they have come forth in a very major way, and they have made their facilities available to fight the pandemic. But again, to get the economic business back on its foot, the private sector will have to play a very big role, a very major role. And I think, therefore, what one good thing that may happen as a result of the pandemic, which is to create a new level of trust between the government and the private sector, so that we can work together to overcome the negative impacts of this pandemic.
Taking a cue from what you said, Mr. Kumar, about the private sector and talking particularly about the manufacturing sector, manufacturing has been the Achilles heel for Indian economy. There is a counter narrative in this coronavirus outbreak that this is also an opportunity for Indian economy. Would you agree with that narrative?
No, absolutely. I must agree, because again, just to give you a figure, today the WTO, the World Trade Organization, has come up with a figure that the world trade could decline by as much as between 13 to 32% in 2020, which means that the whole trade will dwindle, the world trade will dwindle, as a result of which we can't be dependent on imports to the extent that we have been. So therefore, this is an opportunity for us to create our own make in India, to start manufacturing in India in a very big way, and to reduce our dependence on imports to the extent possible, and also then to become globally competitive. Now, India will be, because of its very young population, because of the size of our economy, because of how we are looking, all our resources that we have, etc., will remain, I think, one of the few economies that will have a positive GDP growth rate in the year 2020 and going forward. Now, this will give us the basis for creating globally competitive industries, so that not only can we use this crisis as an opportunity to expand domestic manufacturing capacities, but we can also take this as an opportunity to create globally competitive capacities and thereby ramping our exports and playing a bigger role in world trade and world commerce in the coming years.
Absolutely, sir, but it is not very serendipitous to hear that world trade will dwindle to this extent. But as you said, that social distancing should be the norm for a few days now, or we don't know for how many days. Vaccination is still a distant goal right now, a distant dream that the world is thinking of. How do we balance lives and livelihoods?
Yeah, no, that's the terrific question, and that's the key question about balancing lives and livelihood. And I think here, of course, the primacy has to be given to saving lives, and we cannot, of course, afford even one extra mortality than we need. That must be done. I think we must have that. We are fortunate in this case that I think 80% of our population is below 55 years of age, and so therefore the chances of that level of mortality, as you've seen in some of the European countries, is probably quite remote in our country, and so therefore we will not have that kind of casualties and mortality as in the case. But here, I think, we are unfortunately, however, in a situation where nearly 50% of our population lives just at sustenance levels. 20% or so is probably still below the poverty line. Another 20% is just above that. And as the ILO said just a couple of days ago, that this crisis could push 400 million Indians below the poverty line. Again, I think it's reported today. Now, therefore, why am I citing all these figures? Is that livelihood and lives is also very closely interlinked in our situation.
Right.
We don't have the luxury of supporting lives without people being in livelihoods. So that there is the balance, in some sense, tilts a little bit in favor of regenerating livelihoods and people going back to work. The sooner the better, rather than having to live on life support through the state and through the charity organization, because our resources, unfortunately, we are not a rich country. Our per capita income is only $2,000 per capita, and not 50,000 as in the US or whatever. So to that extent, I think what we will have to do is to look at this balance very carefully, but also look at it in a very dynamic way, which is that because it's evolving on a daily basis, and so therefore we should retain the flexibility to change our course as and when required, so that we do get back people into earning their livelihoods, by which we can also save lives. Because in a poor country like ours, there's always a risk that loss of livelihood could lead in loss of lives.
So you're making a very imperative point there, and you talked about per capita income and also the sustenance levels of our population. Is it the time to look at universal basic income?
Um, I'm not sure of that. I've not, very honestly, I've not been a supporter of universal basic income, because I again think our country is too diverse, and our conditions across the countries are too different to have once more a pan-India solution of this sort. I don't think that people living in different parts of the country need the same level of universal basic income. So you'll have to decide what is to be done, etc. But at the same time, that we have taken some steps towards it by, for example, under the Pradhan Mantri Kisi NITI Yojana, we give
Yes.
12,000, 6,000 rupees per year to all the farmers. So there is a basic income support. We've got some other things going like that. My own understanding is that what we need to do is to make the conditions for our businesses, for our private businesses, much better, much easier, much more positive, so that they can prosper and they can bring more and more people into full-time employment. Because that, I think, is the need of the hour, rather than at this stage think of providing a universal basic income, because whatever we will provide as universal basic income would be far below the aspiration levels of our young population, because we won't be able to provide very large sum, and anything below that will not meet the aspirations of our young population.
Right, sir. Now let's talk about the idea that you've actually corroborated and suggested, that is about DBT to the migrant workers. Now, the figures that I have, that banks have already started giving cash to the women, and by Saturday, more than 40% of 20 crore women, they had received the cash transfer from the government. What is the way ahead?
Well, the way ahead is to continue with this, also to be able to identify very carefully the migrant worker through the IDs that we have. The good news here is that more than nearly a billion people have Aadhaar identities, and equal number have their mobile phones. So the two of them together can give us a very good idea of who are the people who are in need of the direct benefit transfer. So we can use the JAM Trinity to do that, to be able to do that. Again, here, I think it will have to be implemented by the states themselves, and the central government will have a limited role here. And some states have already gone ahead and started doing this. Uh, it's not such a simple idea, though, to identify all the affected migrant workers, because there are large numbers of them are in the informal sector, and I think about 300 million Indians still don't have bank accounts. So we don't know where to transfer them. But one thing that can be done for sure is that all migrant workers can be allowed access to subsidized food to our public distribution system, even if they don't have ration cards, on the basis of their Aadhaar cards. Because a large number of these migrant workers have left their ration cards behind for their families, and they are here without such a, but so I think that's one step that can be taken right away, so that the migrant workers do get, do get access to the subsidized food. And here again, I think the state governments will have to come forward and make arrangements for the migrant workers who makes herself available for identification, to give both the subsidized food plus some direct cash transfers to tide over this period of income loss and complete shutdown due to the virus.
That's a legit point that you're making, sir. But world over, economies and governments have come out with measures to contain COVID-19, of course, and also to give stimulus package or austerity measures. Talking about India, Government of India announced a relief package of 1.7 lakh crore rupees for the urban and rural poor. A second stimulus package is also expected for the MSMEs. Are those bailouts enough? What else do we need to do? What is the other strategy that you think we can apply right now?
I think let's wait for the next package to come along. And as we have said from the very beginning, the government has adopted a graded approach to providing the stimulus. So let's see, let's wait for the next package and let's see the impact of that, and then alone would we be able to say what else needs to be done going forward. So let me not preempt that in any sense at the moment, and much rather wait for the government to be able to do and do what it's always said, which is that it will take a graded approach and come up with these packages as and when required and in the amount required.
So, NITI Aayog always has been at the forefront of pushing the MSMEs, providing them a booster shot. In this hour of crisis, also, startups and MSMEs have actually given us solutions. How do you see the role of startups in this present scenario?
Well, startups are the key going forward, And I think this is again a situation where the crisis can be an opportunity for them, because the crisis throws up, several areas, where you need new solutions, and the old forms and the old practices and the old ways of doing things will not work. So I think this is the right sort of, in some sense, the right environment for the startups to, to come forward and to come up with their new ideas. As you said, NITI Aayog has been always supportive of them. We have our own Atal Innovation Mission, which has put up these many incubating centers, and the startups, are most welcome to use them. We're also trying to work with several ministries, to promote innovations and promote startups in those particular areas. It's 6 or 7 ministries. So I think, but at the same time, the complete economic shutdown and the sort of constraint on financial flows does pose a little bit of a challenge also to the startups, because the kind of financing that they require and the kind of support that they require may not be forthcoming. But nonetheless, I think the more we can promote and the more we can nurture our startups, the better off we are. And NITI Aayog is doing whatever it can through its different wings to be able to do so and work with the startups.
Right, sir. Point well taken. And lastly, sir, I understand that NITI Aayog has asked more than 92,000 NGOs. It has asked doctors to come out and volunteer. What kind of response are you getting?
We've got a tremendous response. We keep getting feedback and offers of help from all over the place. We also have our own Darpan where all these people are registered, and we have a standing committee to engage with the NGOs and the civil society organizations. NITI Aayog is in the business of interacting with the civil society on all these major issues. And I'm very glad to report that we are at the moment getting a very good response to the appeal made by the CEO, Mr. Amitabh Kant, to all these organizations, and we will engage them and use them as effectively as we can in this fight against this pandemic.
Absolutely, sir. Mr. Kumar, thank you so much for joining us in these days of social distancing through Skype. And thank you so much for that erudite conversation. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thanks a lot. Thank you. Wonderful to be here. Bye
Thank you,
bye.
sir. Thank you.